Hashem is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he says it's time for him to uphold the bris, the covenant, to give the land of Canaan. He promised it to the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. V'gam ani shamati es nakas b'nei Yisrael Hashem Mitzrayim Amidah osam. Pasuk. I've also heard the outcry of the Mitzrayim who are enslaving them. The Eskos Brisi. I mean, I was never sensitive to this. He should say, it's time now to what? I've heard the outcries of the Bnei Israel. What does he add? Hashem Mitzrayim Amidah osam. Because the Egyptians are enslaving them. And these Shabbat we had earlier, they cried out because of the enslavement. He's speaking about the fulfillment of the bris to give the land of Canaan to us. And he says, I've heard their outcries of the Egyptians who were enslaving the Jews. And therefore, Veska Brisi, therefore I remembered my bris. So if you take a look at Rashi, the Gam, Kamoshi Tzavti Marti Abris, just as initially I established the covenant between us, Yeshalai Lakayim. Now the time has come to fulfill it. Therefore, since the time has come to fulfill it, therefore, Shamati is not and they were crying out earlier. But because now it's come the time to fulfill the bris, therefore, I'm attentive to their outcries. Just that, even that piece. Because since the time to fulfill the bris has come, therefore now I'm listening to their outcries. Although, as I said, they were crying out early from the enslavement, but since it wasn't time to fulfill the bris, therefore Hashem did not respond to their outcries. Why is now the time? So we've mentioned what was the objective of the bondage in Egypt. The objective was to undergo a process that after being there so many years, they can be qualified to receive the Torah at Sinai. That was the process. That was the enslavement process. Now, we meant to be there 400 years. We're only there 210 years. Why? Because since the Jews had fallen to a level due to the impurity of Egypt, the idolatry, if we wouldn't have left exactly at the moment that we left, we would have gone into the oblivion. And there would have never been a Kabbalah Torah. So the only reason why we left at that moment was because if the objective of the enslavement would have any value, we had to leave then. So until then, being enslaved was part of the process to qualify us to have the capacity to receive the Torah at Sinai. So although we cried out earlier, it didn't make a difference. That was undergoing the process to qualify us. But now it's come to a time, it's time to uphold the bris. Why is now the time to uphold the bris? Because if I don't respond now, there's no upholding the bris. There's not going to be an Eretz Canaan. The whole value of having Eretz Yisrael, which is, as we discussed yesterday, it's called Eretz HaKadosha, the Holy Land, which has no archangel, is to have that special relationship with Hashem, and that's only through the Torah itself. But if we're not going to be qualified to receive the Torah, there's no point. The bris has no value. So therefore, the only reason why now I'm attentive to their outcries, because now is the time. Because it's now or it's never going to be. That's the lochein. That's firstly. Then he says, Hashem Mitzrayim Amidah osam. So take a look at Rashi. Osa bris, the bris bein absorim, that Hashem had said to Avram Avinu, that because you asked this question, Geri Ezarach Be'eretz Lo Lohem, your children, your progeny will be strangers in the land which is not theirs. Va'avodom v'idom osam, they're going to be enslaved and they will be afflicted. And then they're going to have great wealth. That was the bris bein absorim. What did he say? They will be enslaved and afflicted, and the nation that enslaved them will be judged. The Goya Sheyavodu, the nation that enslaved them, don't, I will judge them. And then they're going to go out with great wealth. So why was it so important? that the Egyptians had to be punished. That was part of the Bris Bein Absorim. The Gama Goya She'avodu Donanuch, and the nation that enslaved them, I will judge them. Take a look at Rashi. Osa Bris, Ki Bris Bein Absorim Omarti Lo, in the common parts, what did Hashem say to Avram? Gam is Goya She'avodu Donanuchi. That goes hand in hand. That's the fulfillment of the bris. The time I'm listening now. I'm attentive to their outcries because it's time to fulfill the bris. And what is the bris? To judge the nation that enslaved them. That's the fulfillment of the bris. Therefore, as a result of that, I'm attentive to their outcries. Therefore, Veshko is brisi. Now, just a question. Let's say Hashem wouldn't have punished the Egyptians for enslaving us. Why was that part of the covenant, not only giving us the Eretz Yisrael, not only do we have to be enslaved, but the nation that enslaved us will be judged. Going out with great wealth, we understand. But why is the judgment of that nation, why is that so crucial, essential to the Gula? Why? Now, there's a midrash, when we were driven out of Egypt, in Parshas Beshalach, says, Vayehi b'shalach Paro sa'om, when Paro sent out the people, Lo nochem elokim derech eretz plishtim, ki korafu. God did not take us along the Philistine highway route because it was close to Egypt. He took us in the circuitous route. So there's a medrash, a famous medrash, Vayehi b'shalach. In Hebrew, the word Vay means woe. Hashem says, woe that I had to send out the Jews earlier than they should have been sent out. Why? So the Medrash says, because if they would have been longer, I would have brought more plagues upon Paro. And the Jews would have witnessed more plagues. But because the Jews had to leave then, because we would have gone into the oblivion, therefore Hashem had no choice but to send us out after 10 plagues. But if we could have tolerated the shibud, the bondage longer, he would have brought more plagues. But woe that he couldn't. Moshe Dovadoma, what is it analogous to? There was a person who had kidnapped the prince. And they caught the kidnapper. And the king says, give him 100 lashes, the kidnapper. And what happens? And he dies after the 50th lash. So the king says, really, the kidnapper did not get his due. Woe to me that he didn't suffer enough. He should have suffered more because of what he did to my son. Identically, what Paro did to the Jews, the enslavement, and the havoc that he brought upon us, that he brought us to the 49th level of impurity. If I could have brought more plagues, I would have. But since I couldn't, because the Jews themselves had to leave, therefore, woe that I could not bring more. This is the midrash. Mentioned that Beis HaLevi. The Beis HaLevi asked the question. He asked, David Mal says in Tilim, V'rachma v'kol masov. Hashem has mercy on all his creatures. I mean, God just wanted to bring pain upon the Egyptians. Woe to me, I could have pained them, given greater plagues, but I had no choice. The Jews had to leave. But I wish I could have brought greater pain upon them. So the Beis HaLevi explains it this way. What toppled the apple cart? If the Jews wouldn't have sinned with the Chet Egel, the Gemara tells us that before the Chet Egel, the Jews reverted back because at Nasav and Nishma, the pre-sin of Adam. But as a result of the Chet Egel, we reverted back, and as a result of it, it wouldn't have been death. The world would have reached its level of perfection. But because of the Chet Egel, we reverted back to post-sin of Adam. Death was reintroduced, and we're still on this trek to reach the level of perfection. So he explains why. Why did we not reach the level? Because we sinned with the golden calf. But why did we sin with the golden calf? And this he brings psukim and Chazal to show. What happened in Egypt? We became idolaters. We fell to this level of Mem Tashari Tumah, the 49th level of impurity. Now, we read during the Makos, every plague had a purpose. And it says, L'man yedu Mitzrayim kinei Hashem. The plague being a supernatural act, it's clearly showing the hand of God. As a result of that, the purpose was, it had a due purpose. Every plague. It was to punish the Egyptians for what they did. But in addition, it was the supernatural act brought the Jews to a new level of understanding that God is the omnipotent being and the deities have no value. But it was a purging process, it was a filtering process, it was an expunging process that every plague we saw, we experienced, and we witnessed brought us to a more advanced level of belief, and it extracted the impurity that came about due to the idolatry of Egypt. That's what it did, and it continuously strengthened our belief. But because we reached the Mente Shari Tumah, and we had to leave, there were still microscopic cells of that impurity of Egypt that Egypt caused through the bondage. And therefore, because of those microscopic cells, they were reactivated as a result of the Erev Rav. The rabbi was sent out with us, and they're the ones who instigated the Chet Egel. The golden calf, where Moshe Rabbeinu was delayed, or they believed he was delayed. So the Egyptians are held accountable for the world not being able to achieve its level of perfection. So therefore he brings psukim at the end of time, Hashem will destroy Egypt. There will not be a trace of Egypt, because the only reason why we didn't fully recover, because we couldn't experience, didn't have the capacity to remain longer to witness greater miracles. So this is the meaning, Vai B'Shal Parasam, woe to me that I couldn't bring more plagues. It wasn't more plagues to punish the Egyptians. And more plagues would have exposed us to greater levels of supernatural. As a result of that, even these traces of the impurity, of the microscopic cells of impurity, would have been purged from us, and we would have never been succumbed to the temptation of the Chet Egel through the rabble. This is how the Beis Levi explains that. That's Vayi B'Shalcha. Therefore, woe to me that I couldn't give them more plagues. It wasn't only to punish the Egyptians, it was for the sake of the Jews, to expose them to a greater level of God's omnipotence, which ultimately would have brought us to a level that we would not be in any way affected by any situation. That's how the Beis Levi explains it.
Would that have maybe those extra?
Understanding what the Beis Levi says now. Now, I've listened to their outcries to fulfill the Bris Bein Absorim, to fill the covenant. Then he adds, Hashem Mitzrayim Amidah Moses. So Rashi explains, Ki Bris Bein Absorim Marti Lo, I said to Abraham, Gam es hagoy asher yavodu don anochi. The nation that enslaved you, I will judge them. Why is that so important? Why does Hashem have to say that? What was the value of that judging them? The judging them was that those are the 10 plagues. Because without that, we wouldn't have stood a chance. We would have never made it out. We needed minimally 10 plagues to bring us to a level to be able to say Nasa V'Gishmat Sinai. If we wouldn't have seen those plagues, we wouldn't have seen those supernatural acts, it would have been over. Therefore, that was part telling Avram Avinu, because the Jews themselves, we have to somehow expunge that defective spiritual gene because of the question you asked. So they have to undergo the slavery, the affliction, and whatever it is. However, at the end of the day, what kind of atonement is it? We're going to be crippled forever. We're going to be handicapped forever. No. They will be judged through that judgment. That will be part of a rehabilitation process to allow us to be qualified to be able to go to Sinai 50 days later. That's why Avraham Avinu had to be told, the nation not only will be enslaved to purge us, but they will be judged because that judgment is part of the purging process. Before we leave, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber no bozneon, please request of the people that they should borrow the gold and silver from the Egyptians. please ask, because they may not want to, because they'll be intimidated, whatever reason, we'll discuss it then. So everybody asks, but what is Rashi? Why? Shlo Yoma Osa Tzadik. That tzaddik shouldn't say, Avraham Avinu shouldn't say that the covenant between the parts, the first part was fulfilled, we were enslaved, we were afflicted, and the Egyptians were judged. But he said, then they're going out with great wealth. He never gave the wealth. So they, but please ask of the Jews, they have to borrow that wealth, because otherwise the tzaddik is going to come with a complaint. So to address that Avraham Avinu should not have a complaint, so they ask, let's say Avraham Avinu wouldn't have a complaint. God gave his word. God said after so many years when they leave, they're going to leave with great wealth. It's not because the tzaddik doesn't come with a claim, you didn't fulfill your word. If God has a word, he has to fulfill it for himself, not because anybody's going to have a claim over here. That's the question which is asked. Meaning like this, we speak about eventually we sinned with golden calf. Why? According to the way the Beis Halevi explained, because there was a microscopic impurity left in us, because we couldn't tolerate any longer that environment, we had to leave. That's why the Chet Egel took place. That's why we succumbed. That's why it was a challenge. And we failed. Now, what happened as a result of the Chet Egel? There was Shvius HaLuchos. The first tablets were broken. And for 120 days, Moshe Rabbeinu, 40 days each time, he had to supplicate us, then he comes down after the last 40 days, Luchas Shnimus, second set of tablets, which was at a different level. And what does he say? Make for me a mishkan that I should dwell in your midst. Meaning the relationship is not as initially, it's arm's length. Now we need a medium for me to dwell in your midst. It's called mishkan. Now, they know how the level of wealth you needed to build that mishkan. We're talking mega wealth. As a result of that mega wealth, let's say we pointed it out, Hashem would say to the Jews, you have a chance, we can get nearly back to where we were. So we asked the question, what does it cost? It costs an arm and a leg and everything you own. You could be impoverished. You know what the Jews said? We got to think about it. If we would have said there would have been any level of hesitation, it would have been over. As it was, we were culpable. We did a Chet Egel. After seeing all that, there was a level of culpability. Hashem says, I'm giving you a chance to extricate yourself, to reestablish yourself. It's called Mishkan. You know, you got to think about it. So Hashem gave us so much wealth. As it says, within a day, they brought everything that was needed. That even in the Siyum, the princes, they hesitated. They were nearly left out of the picture. You give that kind of wealth. Then says Hashem preempted the problem by giving them this mega wealth that they should be agreeable to give whatever's needed to build that Mishkan. So Shlomo Tzaddik, the Tzaddik has come with a claim. You enslaved my children to purge them of what? Of that impurity, that defective spiritual gene. And therefore, they had to undergo that process. Now the systems is going to start being reinvigorated, regenerated. But there's still that microscopic cell because they had to leave. And there's a Chet Egel. But if you have a Chet Egel and you don't have a Mishkan, there's no value again. Shlomo Tzaddik. Avram is going to say the whole purpose of this covenant is to bring the Jews to the level where they should be worthy of that relationship. And that relationship can only exist within the context of Torah. But if that's going to be short-lived and ultimately there's no relationship, what's the value of anything? Therefore, Achi Yeshu B'chush Gadol is crucial, is essential for us, for the whole process to have any value, Because ultimately we have to achieve the end result, which is to be that eternal people, and we only eternal people because we have the relationship, and for that you need the Mishkan. So that's almost tzaddik, aken yeshu chush gadol. We have to go out with that tremendous amount of wealth, because anything less than that, nothing has value. Over here it says in the pasuk David, I'm here to uphold the covenant. Losis lemetz eretz kanon. Losis lohem. What's the losis? So if you take a look at the Balaturim, losis ola tof yud tof chol. The numerical value of losis is 410 to 420. That was the period of the first Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash. After that, what happened? We went to exile. So how many years was it losis lohem? We were secure for the first Beis Hamikdash at 410 years. Second was 420. That's the losis lohem. Okay? And then he says afterwards, okay, next person. Therefore, you should say to the Bnei Yisrael, Ani Hashem. Tell them Ani Hashem. Now we're ready for real time. Ani Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is the basis for the revealed miracles, for the 10 plagues. And these are the 4 expressions of Gula. I will take you out from under the suffering of Egypt. And you'll be saved from their work. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and with great judgment. I mean, great judgment on the Egyptians. And I will take you to me as a people, and I will be your God. And you will know that I am your God. Who took you out from under the suffering of Egypt. So let's talk over here a little bit. Firstly, he uses the term Ani Hashem. We said Yud Kei Vav Kei. Moshe Rabbeinu was given the inner understanding of Yud Kei Vav Kei because he was meant to bring about the plagues. And those plagues directly, as we said, we explained why was Moshe the one who received the Torah? Because the Torah had to be given to Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was the dimension of the whole Jewish people. And we said, why to the Avos HaKadoshim, Hashem says, for them I only reveal myself as Kel Shakai. To you, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. What does Yud Kei Vav Kei represent? God is infinite. God is eternal. Klal Yisrael are eternal. Moshe Rabbeinu, just as he was the only one who had the capacity to receive the Torah, because he is the totality of the Jewish people, which is the objective and the purpose is the eternity of God's glory through us. Identically, Moshe Rabbeinu had relevance to that eternity. Therefore, he was the only one who had the capacity to be able to appreciate Yud Kei Vav Kei, because that was needed to bring about the miracles. Now, this is the point. The miracles addressed all the shortcomings in our spirituality to qualify us to receive the Torah at Sinai. Tell them Ani Hashem. And because Ani Hashem, I'll bring the 4 levels of redemption to qualify them for Sinai. But you need Ani Hashem, because the Ani Hashem is the basis for the 10 plagues. Because you can't bring that about. That's rooted in God displaying his omnipotence, that he's infinite. Nothing exists outside of him. Therefore, that's the first thing to tell them is Ani Hashem. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Ho Yehovah, was, is, and is in the future. And how would that be displayed? Through the 4 expressions of redemption. Chaim Vital, who was the primary student of the Arizal, who recorded all his writings, all the Torah. The Chofetz Chaim always cites the Rav Chaim Vital that just as the Ramach Eivorim in the body, the 248 parts in the body, the 248 parts in the neshama, in the soul. And every mitzvah, the Ramach mitzvah say, and the 248 positive commandments, and the 248 positive commandments correspond to the 248 components in the neshama, and those 248 components correspond to the 248 parts of the body. So there's a direct linkage between the spirituality of the person in the neshama and every aspect of his being. So when we spiritualize that component, the physicality of the person becomes spiritualized. Once it becomes spiritualized, then we start having a sense which goes beyond physical senses. We have due to the spiritualization process, we have an ability to sense that reality of who God is. So it's not no longer abstract, it's reality. And the more we study, the more mitzvah we do, and qualitatively, if we perform at a greater level, it's a more intense, qualitative spiritualization. There's a story cited in the biography of Moshe Feinstein. The halacha is you're not supposed to walk in front of a person when he's saying the Amidah, Shemon Esrei. You're not permitted. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, years ago, there was a wedding hall on the east side. It was called Broadway Central. It's a hotel, and many observant people, religious people, were married there. And Rav Moshe, a car ride from where Rav Moshe's yeshiva was on the Lower East Side to there, it was about a 10-minute car ride. It was on Broadway. It's called Broadway Central. And people would very want Rav Moshe to officiate at the weddings. And he was very giving, even people he barely knew. If they wanted, he would go and officiate. And very often, he would stay just for the chuppah and leave, get back. And so when we'd come, he would check his coat in the check room, the cloak room. And like we do today, between the chuppah and the meal, they daven Ma'ariv. So the person checked Rav Moshe's coat. And now it's time, after he wants to go back. So the person, the driver who's invited to the wedding, he wants to take Rabbi Feinstein back and get right back to the wedding. So what does he do? He has to walk in front of the people with davening Ma'ariv to get the coats out of the cloakroom. So Rav Moshe says to him, you can't do it. You're not permitted to walk in front of a person if he's in the middle of the Amidah. Person says, but we're in a rush. I'd like to get your coat, take you back to yeshiva and get back here. He says, is it so terrible? So Moshe Feinstein says, I want to ask you a question. If there'd be a brick wall here, and you have to go through the brick wall, you tell me to go through the brick wall to get my coat. You can't go through a brick wall. If the halacha says you're not permitted to walk in front of a person in the middle of the Amidah, it's like going through a brick wall. You understand? He understood it. You're not supposed to. But if what, when? It was a full internalization. Rav Moshe, every minute of the day, his mind was occupied in Torah. He was at a level, you read that book, it's not to believe what kind of person he was. His Torah, his chesed, everything. So because he had that level of internalization. So the way we have a sense of that, and we understand how everything corresponds, the neshama, the body, the mitzvahs, it's all one continuum, then you understand how you come upon this level of sense to be able to understand who God is and who God is not. Okay, we'll stop here, do the halacha.